Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, I want you to picture the harshest desert environment imaginable.
Oh, yeah. Blazing heat, zero shade.
Exactly. You're navigating that heat, you're carrying everything you own, and you're relying entirely on whatever the rocky soil can offer you.
Which isn't much.
Right. And, most of us today, when we read ancient historical texts, specifically the Bible, and we see descriptions of what people ate or like the rituals they performed to survive out there.
We tend to just put it in a strictly spiritual box.
Yes. We assume a land flowing with milk and honey or a prophet surviving in the wilderness is just a metaphor, like symbolic window dressing for a moral lesson.
I mean, it's an easy assumption to make. We view those narratives through a purely literary lens because while we're thousands of years removed from the daily physical reality of that era, we don't naturally look at an ancient purification ritual and think, oh, that's a sophisticated dietary and medical guideline.
But then you stumble onto something that completely flips that perspective. We're taking a deep dive today into a massive stack of research centered around this really fascinating YouTube video from the channel Homestead Roots.
Yeah, titled 20 Biblical Superfoods That Will Heal You Instantly.
And the core premise we are exploring today is absolutely wild. The argument is that these ancient texts weren't just offering poetic symbols, they were actually recording highly accurate, clinically backed nutritional prescriptions.
It really demands a complete paradigm shift. We're talking about civilizations functioning long before microscopes,
Right.
before the concept of a virus, and obviously way before randomized clinical trials, yet the specific dietary and healing habits recorded in these texts align perfectly with what modern pharmacology and nutritional science are only just now uncovering.
And we've got some massive revelations to share with you. For instance, we're going to uncover the truth about what John the Baptist was actually eating out there in the harsh wilderness.
Spoiler alert, it was not crunchy insects.
Definitely not bugs. Plus, we're going to look at an ancient purification herb used in sacred rituals that modern science has suddenly recognized as a potent antiviral. Okay, let's unpack this. If we're going to understand this ancient diet, we have to start at the foundation, which, surprisingly, was largely liquid.
Yeah, setting the foundation with liquids makes perfect functional sense. In the ancient Mediterranean world, certain liquids were the absolute bedrock of sustenance, fuel, and daily medicine.
They weren't just pouring a beverage to go with a meal.
No, not at all.
The prime example in the video is olive oil, which it literally calls the liquid gold of the ancient world.
I mean, it's mentioned well over 100 times in the text.
Right, but what caught my eye was how it was used medically. You have the famous story of the Good Samaritan pouring oil and wine into a stranger's wounds. That wasn't just a random act of kindness or, a symbolic gesture, but what was it actually doing to the damaged tissue?
What's fascinating here is the specific biochemistry that makes extra virgin olive oil so medically potent. The video highlights a polyphenol, which is a type of organic compound called oleocanthal.
Oleocanthal.
Yeah, and when modern researchers put oleocanthal under the microscope, they find it works almost identically to the drug ibuprofen in the human body.
Wait, really? It acts like ibuprofen?
Exactly. It actively blocks the specific enzymes that cause inflammation and pain.
Which would totally explain why the Mediterranean diet, built entirely around olive oil, is constantly linked to reduced heart disease and cognitive decline. But there has to be a catch, because the ancient world wasn't using the clear, heavily refined stuff sitting in plastic bottles on aisle 4 of our grocery stores today.
Oh, definitely not. The clinical benefits rely entirely on the oil being cold-pressed and unfiltered. It essentially has to be a living food.
Okay, so processing ruins it.
Completely. When modern commercial oils go through high heat and chemical processing to, extend their shelf life, that process destroys the vitamin E, the delicate antioxidants, and that crucial oleocanthal. The medicine is refined right out of it.
Speaking of living foods, let's talk about raw honey. Because when I read the source material on this, I immediately pictured raw, ancient honey as this sort of living pharmacy, whereas the heated, ultra-filtered grocery store honey you get in the little plastic bear is basically a dead, sugary imposter.
That analogy perfectly captures the stark contrast. The ancient texts constantly reference honey for vitality. You see stories of soldiers eating wild honey and their eyes physically brightening from the immediate energy.
But it's not just calories, right?
No, beyond calories. Modern science shows raw honey is one of the most powerful natural antimicrobials on Earth.
Yeah, the video claims it can literally kill antibiotic-resistant bacteria like MRSA. How is a sugary syrup pulling that off? I mean, bacteria love sugar.
It does, but honey employs a multi-pronged chemical attack that bacteria simply can't adapt to. First, when raw honey comes into contact with the moisture in human tissue, it triggers an enzyme that produces hydrogen peroxide.
Oh, wow. So it's a slow-release antiseptic.
Exactly. Second, it has a naturally low pH, creating a highly acidic environment where pathogens just struggle to survive. And third, it contains a specific immune protein called defensin 1, which actively hunts down and destroys bacterial cell walls.
That is insane.
Yeah.
But just like the olive oil, if you pasteurize it, if you heat it up to make it flow easier in a factory, you kill the defensin 1 and the enzymes.
You obliterate the medicine. The unheated raw substance is so structurally sound that archaeologists have actually uncovered jars of honey in 3,000-year-old Egyptian tombs that are still perfectly edible.
It simply does not expire.
It doesn't.
So honey was the ultimate topical medicine and preservative. But what about internal threats? In an era long before municipal water treatment, how did they stay hydrated without contracting dysentery? The video brings up wine, noting that Scripture warns against excess, obviously, but clearly prescribes it as a medicinal staple.
Right, there's a specific letter where Paul tells Timothy to use a little wine for his frequent stomach ailments.
Yeah, so returning to the Good Samaritan's first aid kit, mixing wine with water was standard daily practice.
A diluted wine mixture acted as a genuine prophylactic against waterborne illness. Studies have demonstrated that wine, even at moderate concentrations, neutralizes common gut pathogens like E. coli and Salmonella far more effectively than an equivalent amount of pure alcohol.
And researchers point to the resveratrol from the grapeskins as well, right?
Yes, which is thought to explain the French paradox, how certain populations maintain low heart disease rates despite really rich diets.
It's an incredible baseline of defense. But, preventing dysentery or cleaning a scrape is one thing. Treating an acute, potentially deadly medical emergency is another entirely. The sources bring up the story of King Hezekiah, who is dying from a severe skin ulcer or boil.
A very severe infection, yeah.
Right. And the prophet Isaiah instructs them to take a lump of pressed figs and apply it directly to the infected wound. And the king recovers. To a modern reader, that sounds like pure magic. What is actually happening biologically?
It sounds like magic until you look at the chemistry of the fig. Figs contain an enzyme called ficin.
Ficin, okay.
Yeah, and ficin is a proteolytic enzyme, which means its specific job is to break down proteins. When you apply a fig poultice to a festering wound, the ficin acts as a chemical debriding agent.
Yeah, meaning what?
It literally digests and clears away the dead necrotic tissue, which then allows the healthy cells underneath to regenerate.
Wow. It's basically performing enzymatic surgery.
Add to that the fact that fresh fig latex naturally inhibits bacterial growth, and you have a highly sophisticated, multi-stage topical treatment.
Which leads us directly to hyssop, the herb I teased at the beginning of the show. The texts are just full of hyssop. It's used in purification rituals, as mentioned in the Psalms, where the writer asks to be purged with hyssop, and it's even offered on a sponge during the crucifixion.
It was everywhere.
But I have to push back a little here. Did the ancients actually understand the complex biology of why a fig poultice or a sprig of hyssop worked? Or did they just stumble into a lucky symbolic ritual that happened to accidentally kill viruses?
That question cuts to the heart of how ancient knowledge was built. They didn't need to isolate a molecule in a lab to know it worked. Observation over hundreds of generations served as their peer review. The consistent, undeniable healing was their proof.
Right, the results spoke for themselves.
Exactly. When we analyze hyssop today, we find it contains high levels of carvacrol and thymol.
Wait, carvacrol and thymol? Those are the exact same antiseptic compounds we find in modern oregano and thyme oil, right?
They are. So when ancient leaders instructed people to use branches of hyssop to sprinkle water over surfaces or individuals after a disease outbreak, they weren't just performing a spiritual theater. They were actively applying a potent antibacterial and antiviral agent.
That is mind-blowing.
Clinical research shows these compounds can even inhibit the herpes simplex virus and act as an expectorant to clear thick mucus from the lungs.
The symbolism was literally a delivery mechanism for hard functional science. That is incredible. But surviving an infection or an outbreak is only part of the story. Ancient armies, builders, and pilgrims were burning thousands of calories in grueling conditions.
Massive physical exertion.
Yeah. How did they fuel that kind of labor without the luxury of modern protein bars?
They relied on what we might call the meals ready to eat, or MREs, of the ancient world. And the date palm was at the top of that list. It was revered precisely because it provided highly concentrated portable energy in the harshest environments.
The video breaks down the date as the original energy bar. And sure, they are packed with fast sugars, but unlike a modern candy bar where the sugar hits your bloodstream and causes a massive crash.
Right, the glucose in dates is heavily packaged with dietary fiber, magnesium, and potassium.
And that packaging matters.
That structural packaging dictates how the body processes the energy. The fiber ensures a steady, sustained release of glucose rather than a spike. The video even points to modern clinical trials showing that pregnant women who consume dates in their final weeks of pregnancy experience significantly faster, smoother deliveries.
Wow.
Yeah, the compound effect of the polyphenols helps reduce oxidative stress during immense physical exertion.
For sustained muscle repair, the sources highlight lentils. There is that famous story of Esau trading his birthright for a bowl of red lentil stew. As a kid, you read that and it sounds insane. But if you are starving after a hunt, why are lentils the ultimate survival food?
Because of their sheer density, you're looking at around 18 grams of protein per cooked cup.
That's a lot.
It is. Legumes like lentils are shelf-stable for years, requiring zero refrigeration. Furthermore, modern population research studying the blue zones, areas where people routinely live past 100, shows that regular legume consumption is arguably the strongest dietary predictor of human longevity in the world.
And alongside that lentil stew, you would traditionally have barley bread.
Barley occupies an interesting space because it was historically considered the food of the poor. During the narrative where Jesus feeds the 5,000, the text specifically notes they were humble barley loaves. Yet those ordinary crowds were consuming one of the most mechanically beneficial grains in existence.
Because of a specific fiber called beta-glucan.
Exactly.
The video notes that barley contains the highest concentration of beta-glucan of any grain. But what does that fiber actually do once you eat it?
Well, beta-glucan is a type of soluble fiber that acts quite uniquely. When it reaches your digestive tract, it absorbs water and forms a thick, viscous gel. This gel coats the lining of the gut, which drastically slows down the absorption of sugars into the bloodstream. It's so effective at trapping cholesterol and regulating post-meal blood sugar that it vastly outperforms standard oats. It's actually FDA approved for lowering cholesterol.
But we can't talk about ancient grains without addressing a massive elephant in the room. Here's where it gets really interesting. When these texts mention wheat, they are referring to ancient varieties like einkorn or emmer.
Yes, not what we eat today.
Right. Modern dwarf wheat, the stuff in almost all of our pantries right now, was bred in the mid-20th century purely to maximize crop yields. It has 42 chromosomes. Ancient einkorn only has 14. Is modern commodity wheat essentially a rushed software update that introduced a bunch of digestive bugs into the human system, whereas ancient einkorn is the slow, reliable legacy system?
That analogy hits the nail on the head. By aggressively breeding wheat for maximum yield and specific traits that favor industrial baking, agriculture fundamentally altered the plant's architecture.
It changed the code.
Exactly. Einkorn's 14 chromosome structure contains an entirely different, much weaker type of gluten. Many individuals who suffer from severe sensitivities to modern commodity wheat find they can digest ancient einkorn perfectly fine. It also retains higher levels of protein and antioxidants like lutein.
And the preparation matters just as much as the plant. The ancients used slow sourdough fermentation. They didn't use fast-acting commercial yeast.
The slow fermentation process is essentially predigestion. The natural lactobacillus bacteria break down the phytic acid, which normally blocks mineral absorption, and they dismantle the complex gluten proteins long before the bread ever enters your mouth.
Wow. So moving from digestion to the broader gut ecosystem, the source material explores how these populations intuitively hacked their microbiomes. There is a really vivid moment in the text where the Israelites are wandering in the desert eating nothing but manna, and they literally break down weeping.
Yeah, they are crying because they miss the garlic, onions, and leeks of Egypt.
When I read that, I had to wonder, were they just bored with a monotonous menu, or was their gut microbiome physically going through withdrawal?
Based on the clinical data surrounding those specific alliums, physical withdrawal is a highly plausible theory. They were suddenly deprived of keystone medicinal compounds. Garlic, for instance, contains allicin, a broad-spectrum antimicrobial released when the clove is crushed.
Right, it defends against parasites.
Exactly. It defends the body against various parasites and pathogens, but onions are where the deep microbiome connection really shines.
The video calls onions the prebiotic king. They are packed with quercetin, which helps fight inflammation, but they also contain high levels of inulin-type fructans. Can you explain what a fructan is actually doing down there?
Think of fructans as an exclusive buffet for the most beneficial bacteria in your colon. Human enzymes can't break these fibers down, so they travel intact to the large intestine, where strains like bifidobacterium and lactobacillus ferment them.
So the ancients were systematically feeding the microscopic ecosystem that regulates everything from immunity to mood.
Entirely intuitively, yes.
We see that same sophisticated internal management with their spices. Jesus specifically mentions the religious leaders tithing cumin, which tells you it was incredibly valuable.
Extremely valuable.
The research shows cumin lowers fasting blood sugar, stimulates digestive enzymes, and delivers a massive dose of iron. And then there's coriander, the dried seed of the cilantro plant. The manna in the wilderness is specifically compared to coriander seed.
Coriander brings an entirely different utility to the table. Modern clinical research shows coriander possesses genuine anxiolytic or anti-anxiety effects.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In animal models, the extracts reduce anxiety behaviors at levels comparable to pharmaceutical drugs like diazepam.
They had natural anti-anxiety medicine hidden in their daily bread. Plus, it has compounds that help mobilize heavy metals out of the body's tissues. So we have this rugged foundation of healing roots, grains, and spices. But the ancient diet wasn't just about scraping by. It had its absolute luxuries, the foods of abundance that signaled wealth, divine favor, and profound cellular protection.
The pomegranate is a prime example of that abundance. King Solomon decorated his massive temple with hundreds of carved pomegranates. Today, antioxidant scientists study this fruit relentlessly. It contains a very specific compound called punicalagin.
And when you eat punicalagin, your gut bacteria break it down into something called urolithins, which are serious anti-cancer and anti-inflammatory agents.
Very potent ones, yeah.
But getting the seeds out of a pomegranate is exhausting, messy work. You have to break the rind, peel the membrane, and pick out the seeds. It's almost like nature built in a portion control and effort reward system. Unlike pulling up to a modern drive-thru where you get an instant unearned calorie bomb, you really have to work for this medicine.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that physical friction was an essential feature of their health. The ancient diet required immense physical effort to harvest, process, and consume.
It wasn't passive.
No, and that built-in effort inherently prevented the kind of hyperconsumption that drives modern metabolic disease. It ensured the nutritional integrity of the food remained intact because it couldn't be easily mass-produced and refined.
You see a similar dynamic with grapes. They weren't just extracting the juice, they were consuming the skins and the seeds, which delivered massive doses of resveratrol. The research notes that resveratrol activates something called sirtuins. What exactly is a sirtuin?
Think of sirtuins as your body's internal maintenance crew. They are proteins that regulate cellular health and repair damaged DNA.
Okay, that makes sense.
As we age, that maintenance crew tends to get sluggish. Resveratrol essentially acts as the chemical signal that wakes the crew up and gets them back to work, which is why it's heavily researched for extending lifespan.
This theme of high-quality abundance extended to their proteins as well. The disciples were famously fishermen on the Sea of Galilee. Fresh fish provided the essential omega-3 fatty acids, EPA, and DHA.
Crucial nutrients.
Yeah, DHA is literally the building block of your brain cell membranes, while EPA fights systemic inflammation. But context is everything here. They were eating these fish simply grilled over an open fire. They weren't battering them and deep frying them in inflammatory, highly processed seed oils that completely oxidize the omega-3s.
The preparation method preserved the medicine. We see that same principle with their dairy. The Promised Land was famously described as flowing with milk and honey, but that milk wasn't the modern, homogenized A1 cow's milk most people drink today.
Right, it was goat's milk or sheep's milk.
Yeah.
The video explains that goat's milk has a totally different protein structure, primarily containing A2 casein. For someone who struggles with modern dairy, that A2 protein is significantly easier for human digestive enzymes to break down.
Exactly. It's naturally homogenized, meaning the fat globules are smaller, and it's loaded with its own probiotics.
It was an entirely different biological input. You see a similar density of vital nutrients reflected in their sacred symbols, like the almond. The menorah, the sacred lampstand of the ancient tabernacle, was intricately designed with cups shaped specifically like almond blossoms.
Because almonds are an absolute powerhouse. They're loaded with vitamin E, but the really wild part is their cell wall structure.
Oh, yeah.
When you chew an almond, you don't even absorb all the fat calories. The intact cellular structures pass through your stomach and end up feeding your gut bacteria instead.
Nature's slow-release energy again. And if you really wanted to show off your wealth and status in that era, you gifted pistachios.
Right. When the patriarch Jacob sent his sons to Egypt during a severe famine, he instructed them to carry pistachios as a luxury gift for the Egyptian rulers.
Because they were so prized.
Nutritionally, pistachios are uniquely high in lutein, which protects eye health. And like almonds, their specific prebiotic fiber significantly increases beneficial gut flora.
Okay, we've covered the medicinal liquids, the acute first aid, the daily fuels, the microbiome hackers, and the luxury foods. But we have to conclude with the ultimate wilderness diet, the grand finale of this deep dive. So what does this all mean for the story of John the Baptist? We've always been taught he was a wild man surviving on locusts, as in the flying, swarming insects and wild honey.
It turns out that may be a fascinating historical and ecological mistranslation. Many scholars, especially those intimately familiar with the botany of the Judean landscape, argue that the word locusts in this specific context refers to the pods of the carob tree.
Really?
Yeah. For centuries, carob pods have been historically known in that region as locust beans or St. John's bread.
Carob pods, which
Wow.
completely changes the narrative. The video breaks down the nutritional profile of carob, and it is staggering for a survival food. It's about 50% natural sugar, providing immediate energy in a barren landscape.
But crucially, that sugar is bound up with 40% dietary fiber.
Wow, 40%.
That intense fiber ratio is the key to wilderness survival. It regulates digestion perfectly when water and resources are scarce. Furthermore, carob contains a high concentration of condensed tannins, or proanthocyanidins.
Proantho what?
Proanthocyanidins. These compounds have heavily documented anti-diarrheal and antimicrobial effects. In fact, clinical studies show carob powder is highly effective against rotavirus, and it was actually used in European hospitals to treat severe childhood diarrhea long before modern pharmaceuticals were developed.
And those tannins actually bind to the proteins in the gut, slowing down digestion even further, so you get this incredibly sustained, slow-burning energy. So think about this combination.
It's brilliant.
If you pair the fast sugars, the massive fiber, and the anti-diarrheal tannins of the carob pod with the raw, enzyme-rich, MRSA killing power of wild honey.
John the Baptist wasn't starving or suffering nutritionally. He was basically living on the most medically powerful survival rations on the planet. He was thriving in an environment that would kill most people. It completely reframes how we read these texts. The people who recorded these practices and the cultures that lived them were brilliant, meticulous observers of the natural world.
They didn't need to map the human genome to know exactly what healed them and what sustained them.
Exactly.
The healing was the point. The observation was their science. And modern double-blind clinical trials are just now catching up to the theology and agriculture they intuitively built thousands of years ago. But if there's one massive takeaway from all of these sources, whether we are talking about the cold-pressed olive oil, the unheated raw honey, or the ancient 14-chromosome wheat, it is that quality and processing are the ultimate deciding factors.
Without question. You cannot separate the clinical benefits of these foods from the way they were historically grown, harvested, and prepared. The heavily processed, heat-treated, and genetically altered versions that dominate modern diets simply do not contain the active medical compounds we've explored today.
You can't just buy a plastic bear full of boiled sugar syrup and expect it to cure a wound. You have to seek out the real living foods. And that leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. If our ancient ancestors intuitively built their entire theology, their daily rituals, and their economies around these complex, healing whole foods, what highly processed modern staples will our descendants look back on as the obvious, glaring root of today's health crises?
It's a question that demands we look very closely at the foods we've simply accepted as normal.
Until next time, keep questioning and keep diving deep.